Hi, it's me again. You might be wondering why I'm doing a video on Asterigos. Because I got sent a review copy of it. And I guess they didn't get the memo over at Tiny Build, but whatever. I actually saw this on a Steam dumpster diving video from Iron Pineapple. And I thought, you know what? This looks pretty good. I'll give it a shot if I get the opportunity, and then I got one, so there you go. I don't like this game very much. And the reason why I decided to actually do a video on it is because I think it exposes what makes Souls Souls. What makes those games so interesting. And Asterigos fails in a multitude of ways that Souls succeeds. And I'm pretty much talking about the From Software games here. I'm not talking about any other clones or anything like that. Just what those games did to be interesting that this game just cannot do. And there's a few reasons for that, but I'm going to try and split them into three rough categories. Discovery, difficulty, and freedom. So when I'm talking about discovery, I'm talking about the ability to walk around a corner and see something new. Try something else out. Give something a go that you otherwise wouldn't have expected, or just finding something cool, whether it be a boss fight, a combat encounter, or something like a secret that can completely change the way you think about the lore or the intrigue of what's going on. Because Dark Souls, in general, doesn't really give you much. You'll get like a cutscene telling you about some people, and then it'll throw you in and tell you to go your own way. Asterigos fails at this. At least I'm pretty sure it does. As I said, I haven't played it at the very end yet, but the way that they've been going on about everything, it's making me think that it's pretty obvious what's going to happen next. But they spend a long time telling you about the bad guys, the good guys, who they are and what they did, and how you're going to go and beat up all the bad guys. It's not great. What's even worse is the main character, who cannot shut up. I'm not even kidding. She's kind of worse than Aloy in the couple hours that I played of Horizon Zero Dawn. I really wish they'd let you get to the hunting dinosaurs faster. But this game's main character, whose name I can't remember for the life of me despite the fact I've got gameplay footage right in front of my face, she never shuts up. If she sees a bottomless pit full of water, she'll tell you, that water looks bottomless. If she sees another obstacle that you need to worry about, she'll warn you about it. If she sees some environmental detail that's incredibly obvious, she'll tell you about it. And it gets so annoying so quickly. Because the game can't let me make my own assumptions. The game can't let me use my own senses to see and hear what's going on around me. It just never stops talking. And sometimes it'll give you a break for something like 20 minutes. But then it'll immediately give you something incredibly blatantly obvious, and you'll just roll your eyes into the back of your head and get hit by something that you couldn't see because your eyes are in the back of your head. It's genuinely annoying how often she just insists on talking to herself. And of course this means you don't really get to discover that much about the world that the game just doesn't blatantly tell you. And it's kind of annoying. Like, really annoying. Especially when there's very little to actually discover. Because the way this game's weaponry works is that you've got 6 weapons. Straight up. Like, at the very beginning of the game, in the first 15 minutes, you'll have all 6 of your weapons. And you're allowed to pull them all out and experiment with them in whatever way that you wish. Excuse me. So, you can grab 2 weapons out and play around with them and have fun with them. Cool. Except you need to pause the game in order to swap weapons, and it takes ages to actually get to the menu where you can swap weapons. And by ages, I mean a few seconds, don't get me wrong, but in a game like this, where you want to be swapping out weapons on the fly, having to go through a few seconds to try out a new set of weapons is really damn annoying. And as a result, I found myself just sticking with the spear and the staff because they seem like the best weapons by far. The only ranged attack option in the game, and one that lets you parry and counter-strike pretty much, well, not so much pretty much every attack in the game, but a lot of attacks in the game. Not to mention the longest range by a significant margin. It has the Elderborn problem, where the other weapons just don't seem good enough. There's too many advantages to the staff and the spear. This also means that you don't really get to discover much out in the world itself. Now, they do a couple of neat... I said do. They do a couple of neat things, where they have the, like, text scrolls that you can find out in the world and whatnot. Those are okay. And they've got echoes, which let you, like, observe the world, which is, and, you know, like, listen to conversations without her butting in. I enjoy those enough. You know, I'm not particularly interested in the world, because, again, a lot of it gets told to you right off the bat, so there's very little mystery to it. Again, a failure in discovery. But the world itself has very little to actually find. The levels are very linear, so there's very little to actually see. The little branches that do exist are either to lead you to another area that you'll have to go through eventually, or very tiny side paths with nothing but crafting materials in them. Because all you actually have to find in this game is crafting materials to upgrade your 6 different weapons. Yeah, your weapons are all upgraded individually, by the way, which is worse in this game than it is in something like Dark Souls, because you get very little in the way of crafting things, and as a result, you can only really keep 2 or 3 weapons at a reasonable height at a time, especially with how much damage enemies start to take. So it ends up being a bit of a problem if you want to play with anything more than 2 weapons. So yeah, that's a good start. But it also means that you won't be finding any interesting, like, side boss fights or anything like that. Because it's intended for you to go down these paths anyway. And Dark Souls is great with its secret walls, because you can come back to the game years later with knowledge from a wiki or something and be like, oh, I didn't know that was there, despite the fact that I walked past this wall so many times I can't count. Bit of a dick when it comes to, like, reasonable game design, don't get me wrong. But this game's visible secret walls are so over the top as to actually be hilarious. Like, they're these massive holes in the wall. Well, not massive holes, but, like, just massive brick walls with, like, obvious cracks. They're huge. You can't miss them. So it definitely feels like it's going in the other direction. And as a result, it feels like you've seen everything the game has to show you within a couple of hours. You fight a few bosses, and the annoying thing about the bosses is that their health is, like, really high, while, like, the enemies that you fight will often have really low health, so the bosses often end up becoming more of a slog than an actual fun fight. Not something Dark Souls is immune to, I'll tell you that much, but yeah. It's still not great how tanky some of these bosses can be. And then we move on to the difficulty, which isn't great. As I said, with the girl talking to herself as much as she is, it can make certain things kind of easy. Although, it is notable that there are some big spikes, although with the amount of stats that you can assign to... You've only got 3 stats that you can assign, which is basically health, attack, and how much you get for your special attacks. Which is, like, not much to work with. Again, discovery kind of goes out the window because there's not so much in the way of alternate builds in this one, I'll tell you that much. But anyway, yeah, as I said, difficulty. It's not that hard of a game. A lot of the enemies have really obvious tells to their attacks. The game only really gains difficulty when it throws, like, 8 enemies at you at once. And so when you go up against the bosses and you just have to learn them and hope that your health potions don't run out before you learn their patterns, it makes the game easy enough to the point where you're able to just endlessly run around and do stuff. Hell, your basic attacks don't even take up stamina, so you can just swing with aplomb most of the time. The only thing that takes up stamina is your special attacks, which is, in the case of, like, my build, it was mostly parrying. But it just ends up being really simple. There's very little to actively learn, or at least to need to worry about learning, and I found it to be a bit of a cakewalk. Not to mention that the way dying works in this game, it is the same as Souls games, except you only lose currency when you die, and I mean currency just flat out, because you just got basic leveling in this one, where you can just grind enemies endlessly until you get all the stats you need, and Admittedly, it feels like you're kind of losing something there, especially since you don't lose any actual XP when you die. And currency is so easy to get that the discouragement from dying in Dark Souls is just not here. You don't have to feel bad about dying to something because you can just come right there, except you can't. Because there's one really goddamn annoying thing about this game and the way that it works. You have like a potion system like you do in Demon Souls, right? Where you've got a limited amount of consumables that will get your health back, and you need to go replenish them every time you die. Except you only get 5 of them when you die, and that doesn't feel like enough. If you want to hold the maximum amount of healing potions, you need to teleport back to the hub world, run around for 10 to 15 seconds until you find the guy that lets you get that back, and then teleport back, either at the cost of a limited use item or an unlimited use item that causes you to lose 10% of your currency. Which feels entirely unnecessary. It just seems like the game's adding 45 seconds to a minute extra just to be a pain in the ass. And so as a result, the difficulty isn't really there. And I already talked about a little bit about why this game doesn't have much in the way of freedom. Where you don't have builds that you can really work on, everything's going to be feeling relatively similar. The game is very linear. And so, as a result, it just feels like you're on this railroad. There's very little in the way of side quests, at least there has been in the first few hours of this. Very little in the way of proper exploration, and I'm bored. I'm genuinely bored. There's very little to this game that I have actually found enjoyment in. And that's depressing, because second to second, it's not that bad when you're actually going up against enemies and not actually having a decently difficult time of it. It can be okay. But it lacks flavor. It lacks exploration, it lacks freedom, it lacks difficulty. It lacks everything that I'm looking for in this sort of game. And they never bloody shut up. And so as a result, I just don't like it. There are so many ways you could improve this, but I guess they just didn't think of it. I guess this is just meant to be like Babby's first Dark Souls. And I don't see the point. You could make this a lot harder. And to be fair, they do give you a way to make it harder. In a chest at the very beginning that you have a very hard time missing. You can go and get like an item that limits you to level 15, another item that causes you to take more damage. But outside of that, there's really not that much else. And the game's still going to play the same way anyway. So yeah, Asterigos. It lacks the soul of Souls. It railroads you hard. It doesn't leave you any mysteries. It doesn't leave you any variety in the gameplay. And it just doesn't work that well. Also, that's on a technical level too. I'm playing the PC version of the game here. It defaulted everything to high, but then ran like absolute garbage. I'm running an 8700K and an RTX 2080, so my rig isn't that bad. But I had to put everything down to medium before my computer stopped screaming. It feels like it's really badly optimized. And I'm not entirely sure why. So yeah, I hope this explains to you why Souls has the following that it does. It's really good on freedom, exploration, and discovery. This game has none of them, and therefore it doesn't really work. With that said, this has been Blue Maxima. I'll see you all later.
The boss is dead! The outsiders killed him!